The ancient saying goes, "Heaven's timing, favorable location, and harmony among people. Only when all three align can great accomplishments be achieved." However, there was one person who, despite calculating all the elements of fate and considering the world, still failed just because a sudden rainstorm. Who was this person? It was none other than Zhuge Liang, the most brilliant strategist of the Three Kingdoms period. On one occasion, he sought to eliminate Sima Yi with a fire attack, cornering his opponent into a death trap, awaiting only a spark to end it all. Yet, why didn't the fire ignite? Why didn't Zhuge Liang use arrows to pierce Sima Yi's heart, letting his opponent escape? Was it fate intervening, or is there another untold reason behind this failure that future generations have yet to uncover? In today's video, we will take you back to Mount Qi, where deep strategies unfolded and brilliant minds clashed. We'll uncover the lesser-known intricacies behind the failed fire attack that left Zhuge Liang lamenting for eternity. If you enjoy history, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so you won't miss out on the fascinating secrets of the Three Kingdoms and legendary heroes. Now, let's dive in. That year at Mount Qi, the heavens and earth seemed to hold their breath. The wind howled through the rugged mountains where two of the most brilliant minds of the Three Kingdoms period silently competed in a battle of wits. On one side was Zhuge Liang, the unparalleled strategist, renowned for his intellect, dedication, and unyielding loyalty to the Han dynasty. On the other side was Sima Yi, a patient and calculating strategist who would eventually lay the foundation for the Jin dynasty. Between these two was a battle not just for the kingdom, but also a test of the highest levels of strategy, intellect, courage, and destiny. After days of planning, Zhuge Liang finally lured the ever-suspicious Sima Yi into a carefully laid trap in the Shangfang Valley. This was no ordinary trap. It was a grand, near-impenetrable snare, a death-and-life chessboard drawn by the hand of a military genius. Supplies were secretly stockpiled in one place, with the Shu army pretending to farm, using wooden oxen and mechanical horses to transport grain openly to mislead the enemy into carelessness. On the outside, it appeared mundane, but inside it was filled with deathly danger. The Wei army, under Sima Yi's command, slowly fell into the trap, much like moths to a flame. As Sima Yi and his soldiers entered the Shangfang Valley, Zhuge Liang immediately launched the fire attack, intending to burn the entire Wei army in one go. However, just as the flames were about to ignite, the sky suddenly darkened and the winds rose violently. The clouds gathered and a torrential downpour poured down. All the months of careful planning dissolved in an instant due to this unexpected rainstorm. Zhuge Liang, the man known for his ability to control fate like a god, could only gaze up at the sky, lamenting, "Man plans, but heaven decides." No matter how grand the strategy, it could be undone by a single drop of water from the invisible realm. But what leaves later generations still puzzled is why, when the fire attack failed, Zhuge Liang didn't use arrows to kill Sima Yi, who had fallen within his sights. Was this simply a mistake of the brilliant strategist, or was it a sign of an inescapable helplessness? The answer, like the mist that covered Mount Qi that day, is both clear and obscure, both near and far. The Shu army had already split its forces, with the majority of troops sent to raid the main Wei camp. Only a small group remained in ambush at Shangfang Valley, enough to set the camp on fire but not to conduct a long-range pursuit with a barrage of arrows. Furthermore, the distance between the ambushed Shu army and Sima Yi's forces was outside the effective range of the archers, especially in the heavy rain, where the arrows would have been ineffective, their flight paths disrupted. Shooting arrows at that time would have been like throwing stones into a pond, futile and easy to fall into the enemy's counterattack. Moreover, it must be understood that the Wei army at that time still had tens of thousands of soldiers. while Zhuge Liang's forces had only about 500 vanguard troops in the valley. Even if arrows were fired, it would be like scratching the iron armor of a tiger general. If the pursuit continued, the Shu army would easily be surrounded. Zhuge Liang, who never fought a battle without considering the risks, naturally understood that this was a gamble he could not take. Therefore, despite his immense frustration, he had to swallow his anger, retreat, and thus add another page of sorrow to the epic of the Three Kingdoms. The fire attack failed, the rain poured down, and Sima Yi narrowly escaped. Zhuge Liang stood in the Shangfang Valley, watching the enemy retreat, his heart burning with rage. Future generations often wonder, if the fire didn't work, why not use 1,000 arrows to pierce Sima Yi's heart, shooting wildly into the valley to ensure his death? It seems like a simple question, but if we examine the situation, considering the times, military strength, terrain, circumstances, and the mindset of the general, we will see that Zhuge Liang couldn't do it. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Firstly, it must be understood that in the ambush at Shangfang Valley, Zhuge Liang's forces had already been split and scattered across many locations. Part of the force was used to plow the fields as a ruse to deceive the enemy. Another part followed Wei Yan to challenge the enemy outside the camp. Another part was tasked with transporting grain. The remaining troops were used to ambush in the valley. This number, by estimation, was only a few hundred elite soldiers. Fire attacks relied on taking advantage of favorable timing, the strong wind and narrow terrain, to turn the few into many. Now that the fire attack had failed, the small number of soldiers in the valley could not collectively draw their bows and fire arrows at Sima Yi's army of tens of thousands. On the other hand, the Wei army was not merely a disorganized force fleeing in panic. When the rain poured down and extinguished the flames, Sima Yi immediately understood the enemy's intentions. Being a suspicious and cunning figure, he quickly reorganized his troops, retreating while maintaining a defensive posture. The distance between the ambushing forces on the high ground and the Wei army in the valley was far, and the rain obscured visibility. Shooting arrows at such a distance would not only be ineffective, but could also expose the ambushers' position, putting them in a vulnerable position for a counterattack. If the surprise attack failed, Zhuge Liang's small forces would not be able to retreat unharmed. Secondly, the terrain of Shangfang Valley was not an ideal place for long-range archery. It was a high mountain region with narrow ravines and unpredictable weather. In the heavy downpour, bowstrings would become damp, the crossbows weakened, and arrows would fly neither far nor accurately nor powerfully. Moreover, the Wei soldiers were scattered in formations and wore heavy armor. To pierce through their defenses to kill a general like Sima Yi would require not just luck, but a miracle. Could Zhuge Liang, who had devised countless strategies, not understand this? Thirdly, and most importantly, shooting arrows would mean revealing his position. The ambush in Shangfang Valley was based on complete secrecy. When the fire burned, everything happened in an instant. But when the flames died out, without maintaining secrecy, the enemy, especially someone like Sima Yi, would quickly seize the opportunity and counterattack. If Zhuge Liang had ordered his troops to shoot arrows into the valley, it would be the same as revealing their identity, location, numbers, and formation. At that point, if Sima Yi decided to risk a counterattack or send troops to surround the forces, Zhuge Liang's small army would be in grave danger and unlikely to escape unharmed. Some may ask, why not call for reinforcements? Why not go all in for a final effort? Alas, Zhuge Liang had already led multiple northern campaigns, with food supplies running low, morale weakening, and his army steadily decreasing in numbers. He still had to plan for a retreat and preserve his forces for the long haul. To put all his forces into a single battle with no guarantee of victory would be like gambling the entire empire on a life-or-death wager. The ancient saying goes, To plan a retreat before the battle is great wisdom. To fight without considering retreat is great foolishness. Zhuge Liang, who was always cautious, could never make such a mistake. Moreover, let us not forget that Sima Yi was not alone. According to historical records, he brought with him tens of thousands of elite soldiers, fully equipped with armor, archers, and cavalry. Even if trapped in the ambush, they were still a battle-ready and organized force. A small group of soldiers stationed on high ground, in the midst of rain and wind lacking in numbers, would find it difficult to break the enemy's formation, even with 100,000 arrows. Even if they managed to kill a few, would Sima Yi easily fall to an arrow among the thousands of soldiers surrounding him? Firing arrows without hitting the general would only strengthen the enemy's defense, making it more of a disadvantage than an advantage. Finally, let us not forget one thing. Zhuge Liang was not only a brilliant strategist, but also a person deeply rooted in principles. He was not a cold-blooded killer. He used strategies to end wars, not to bathe the battlefield in blood. Even though he wanted to kill Sima Yi to alter the course of the war, he acted within proper boundaries, with caution, and always upheld the virtues of a gentleman. Therefore, when the rain poured down and his plan failed, he chose to retreat rather than act blindly. What ordinary people saw as an opportunity slipping away, the wise knew. When heaven doesn't allow it, forcing things only brings disaster. The rain at Shangfang Valley, which seemed like just a weather phenomenon, was, in fact, the full exposure of the connection between heavenly will and human actions, between strategies and the limits of humanity. Zhuge Liang didn't use arrows, not because he was hesitant, but because he foresaw the bigger picture. He understood that retreating one step to preserve the larger plan was better than advancing one step in vain. This was not weakness, but the pinnacle of wisdom, knowing when to act and when to stop. Facing Sima Yi, a wily, calculating fox, suspicious and cautious, Zhuge Liang understood that if he relied on military force to resolve the conflict, the Shu Han would have difficulty defeating the massive Wei army. Therefore, rather than using swords and spears, he chose to use his intellect to shift the tides of battle, leading the enemy step by step into the trap of fate. Mount Qi, with its perilous terrain, high skies, and cloud cover, was the place where Zhuge Liang laid his heavenly net. He did not rush his troops into a head-on assault, but deliberately scattered them, disguising them as farmers. They plowed the fields, set up tents as if giving up on the war. This was part of the plan, to make the Wei army complacent, to make them believe that the Shu troops were exhausted, lacking supplies, and had no will to fight. He also had wooden oxen and mechanical horses transport grain openly, allowing the Wei army to see this and begin to doubt. Several times he allowed small groups to transport grain, making Sima Yi think that Zhuge Liang was indeed in a weak position, running low on soldiers and supplies. This strategy was called using falsehood to create truth, using weakness to appear strong. But that alone was not enough. Zhuge Liang also had Wei Yan, an impetuous general, regularly lead troops to challenge the Wei camp. Each time he would shout insults, calling Sima Yi a coward who was too afraid to face battle. These words not only attacked Sima Yi personally, but also sought to provoke the morale of his officers, creating dissatisfaction and sowing doubt about their leader's courage, thereby forcing Sima Yi to act. The strategy of provoking generals has been a double-edged sword throughout history. It works on the hot-headed, but it's ineffective against someone as calm and patient as Sima Yi. Because of his suspicions and cold demeanor, Sima Yi was not easily provoked by honor or insults. He understood that Zhuge Liang was not a reckless warrior, and that these impulsive actions must have a deeper purpose. Thus, despite repeated requests from his officers to march out, Sima Yi remained steadfast, unwilling to move his troops. Once, Wei Yan even took a fallen helmet of a former Wei general and mocked it in front of the Wei camp, shouting insults that caused his soldiers to blush with anger. But Sima Yi just smiled calmly, waved his sleeve and said, "The sage says, those who cannot endure small things will ruin great matters." This saying not only expressed wisdom for the heart, but also demonstrated the far-reaching vision of the strategist. For Sima Yi, a single victory was not as important as maintaining the integrity of his position. The more the enemy provoked, the less he moved his troops. This was the patience of a man capable of great things. Patience not out of weakness, but to win. Facing such an opponent, Zhuge Liang was not discouraged. On the contrary, he intensified the pressure. On one hand, he continued to make the Wei army think that the Shu army was weak, and on the other hand, he secretly positioned a large force for an ambush in Shangfang Valley, a place with treacherous terrain ideal for a fire attack. Step by step, he led Sima Yi and his forces into the trap. Sure enough, after days of provocation, the Wei soldiers' frustration grew, and under increasing pressure, Sima Yi finally decided to march out, leading his army into the valley exactly as Zhuge Liang had planned. However, the difficulty here was that despite falling into the trap, Sima Yi returned unscathed. The fire attack failed, the plan crumbled in an instant, and the Wei army, like a dragon meeting water, surged forward to escape. Despite Zhuge Liang's brilliant strategy and endless calculations, he ultimately fell into the predicament of "man plans but heaven decides." Looking at the whole situation, we see that Zhuge Liang's strategy was magnificent. Every step was logical, every detail aimed at loosening the enemy's guard. But Sima Yi was no ordinary man. He understood when to be tough and when to be flexible, when to act and when to remain still. All the provocations, all the traps set, never shook his resolve. On the contrary, Sima Yi's calmness, bordering on coldness, forced the enemy to be cautious. And this was why he was called the man who knew how to endure to conquer the world. It was this endurance that made Zhuge Liang, despite his best efforts, unable to defeat him. On the contrary, it made future generations recognize that without Sima Yi, Zhuge Liang's talents might never have been fully realized. These two men, one devising heavenly schemes, the other holding steadfast defenses, created one of the most legendary intellectual battles in Chinese history. In the mortal world, some win by military force, others by strategy. But there are those who win through a single word: endurance. Written in blood, in humiliation, and in the terrifying stillness amid the storm of human emotions. If one were to choose who embodies this word, endurance, to the utmost, no one in the three kingdoms would be more deserving than Sima Yi. Not only did he face off with Zhuge Liang with intellect, but he also triumphed in the psychological battle, a place where others would lose their entire life's achievements with just a moment's hesitation. In the Battle of Mount Qi, Zhuge Liang repeatedly used provocation to lure Sima Yi into battle, but all his attempts failed. Seeing this, he devised one final plan, both treacherous and cruel, a move that made many heroes bow their heads in shame. Zhuge Liang ordered his men to prepare a woman's undergarment, a white robe, and place them in a wooden box, along with a letter full of insults. "You are a coward, wearing armor but too afraid to fight, hiding behind your camp like a woman hiding in her chamber." It was a strike at the very core of a man's honor, a mental torture in front of the entire army. The wooden box was delivered to the Wei camp. The officers were embarrassed and trembling with anger, not daring to open it for fear of Zhuge Liang's command. But Sima Yi, upon seeing it, only smiled faintly, stepped forward and opened the box. Upon seeing the woman's undergarment, his face changed momentarily, but within the blink of an eye, he returned to his usual calm composure. After reading the letter, he only smiled and said, "Does Zhuge Liang think of me as a woman? It's fine. He just wants to provoke me into anger, so I fall into his trap. How could I let a mere undergarment cause me to lose the bigger picture? This was not mere endurance, it was supreme endurance. It's difficult to endure when insulted, but enduring when the whole army looks to you, when the soldiers' morale demands action, and when your forces are being provoked, that is true wisdom. In that moment, Sima Yi not only maintained his own composure, but also kept his entire army in check. He didn't let emotions dictate his actions, but used reason to secure the fate of the Wei army, standing firm like an unmoving mountain amidst 100 storms. His action not only saved Wei from peril, but also laid the foundation for the eventual establishment of the Jin dynasty by him and his descendants. That story has been passed down through generations as a symbol of the person who accomplishes great things. A warrior may die, but he must not suffer disgrace. Yet Sima Yi transcended even this. He endured humiliation to achieve great accomplishments, accepting insults from his adversary without flinching, never exchanging a moment's triumph for fleeting glory. Future generations looking at this story cannot help but marvel. A woman's undergarment, seemingly humiliating, became the great testament to the unshakable resolve of a legendary figure. However, mere intelligence alone does not define a hero. A commander, besides using strategy to defeat the enemy, must also know how to judge people, how to use people. That is true greatness. And in this aspect, comparing Sima Yi to Zhuge Liang, it is clear they were both exceptional, but each had distinct strengths and weaknesses. Zhuge Liang dedicated his life to the state, serving Liu Bei with loyalty, placing integrity and humaneness at the heart of his leadership. He entrusted his subordinates with trust and principles, always hoping they would serve the cause with devotion. Yet, this very quality led him to occasionally place his trust in unworthy individuals. Ma Su, whom he trusted completely, made a fatal mistake at the Battle of Jiatang, causing significant losses for the Shu army. Others, like Yang Yi, Wei Yan, and Li Yan, were either disloyal or unstable, causing Zhuge Liang much heartache as he had to handle both his affairs and the repercussions of his subordinates' failures. In contrast, Sima Yi wielded people like a sharp sword, placing each person in the position where they were most suitable, skillfully managing both loyal ministers and rebellious generals. When handling the treacherous Man Chong, who posed a threat of rebellion, Sima Yi saw through his intentions and quickly sent a conciliatory letter while secretly moving his forces to eliminate him within 8 days. Meanwhile, Zhuge Liang only sent a warning letter, hesitating and failing to act swiftly, thereby missing the opportunity. This exemplifies the difference between a person who dares to take action when necessary and one who, due to excessive focus on principles, loses the chance. Sima Yi's approach to leadership was pragmatic, cold, and focused on results above all else. In contrast, Zhuge Liang's philosophy revolved around loyalty, ideals, and a desire to win hearts through trust and moral principles. If we were to judge them solely by success, it's clear that Sima Yi ultimately achieved victory as he laid the foundation for the Jin dynasty. However, despite Zhuge Liang's lifetime of effort, he failed to realize his dream of restoring the Han. Nevertheless, it is for this very reason that later generations honor Zhuge Liang as the unparalleled strategist, while Sima Yi, despite his success, carries the shadow of a usurper. One won with intellect, the other lost, yet retained the hearts of the people. And in this way, history is fairer than the judgments of the battlefield, because sometimes what seems like a failure becomes eternal glory. Sima Yi never claimed the throne himself, but he laid the groundwork for the rise of the Jin dynasty. After Zhuge Liang's death, he gradually eliminated the power brokers, strengthened the Sima family's power, and left a legacy for his descendants. From Sima Zhao to Sima Yan, the family took the throne from Wei and unified the empire, marking the beginning of the Western Jin dynasty. It was a remarkable transformation, from a subordinate to an emperor, from a loyal minister to a ruler. Looking at the end result, history would say, success and failure define a hero, and Sima Yi is undoubtedly the victor. But was this victory truly glorious? Sima Yi lived his life in the shadows of power, patient, calculating, speaking little but acting decisively. He won in the end, but at the cost of cruelty and manipulation. When the opportunity arose, he didn't hesitate to turn on his allies, eliminate opposition, imprison the emperor, and transform the court into a stage for his own family. His victory was one of cold intellect, silent endurance, and ruthless calculation that surpassed even moral norms. In contrast, although Zhuge Liang failed to restore the Han dynasty, he won in the hearts of the people. He didn't build an empire, but he built trust. He didn't claim the world, but he maintained the mandate of heaven. His life was dedicated to Liu Bei's cause, to the point where his body wore down and his spirit exhausted. His death at the 5-trigram hill while the Shu forces were still trapped symbolized the ultimate loyalty of a minister who lived and died for his ideals. While he may have failed in his ambition to restore the Han, he succeeded in the way he lived and died, living for others. Generations honor him as the unparalleled strategist, building temples in his name, writing stories of his greatness, and seeing him as a model of governance and moral integrity. In the romance of the Three Kingdoms, he is portrayed more than any other character, and his image has found a place in poetry, calligraphy, history, and even as an ideal for Confucian ethics. It is Zhuge Liang, not Sima Yi, who has endured in the hearts of the people and in the cultural consciousness of East Asia, from China to Vietnam, Japan, and even Korea. Therefore, between these two men, who is greater is difficult to determine. If we judge by practical achievements, Sima Yi wins. He and his family founded the Jin dynasty, fulfilling the dream of unification after the chaos of the Three Kingdoms. But if we consider spirit and moral principles, Zhuge Liang is the more admirable figure. He built his life on loyalty as a foundation, righteousness as his pillar, and wisdom as his guide. His life was like a candle, burning itself out to illuminate an ideal that would never fade. Thus the people remember Zhuge Liang with respect and admiration, while they view Sima Yi with caution and awe. One won but had no glory, the other lost but had no shame. One chose to live in the light, the other chose to hide in the shadows. Two figures, two destinies, but both etched in the annals of history. In the end, the confrontation between Zhuge Liang and Sima Yi was not just a battle of swords, but a conflict between principles and pragmatism, ideals and power. The historical outcome recorded is not simply about success or failure, but also about the reflection of the character of the people who shaped the era. If we judge solely by the results, we might forget the spirit behind it. But if we only consider the spirit and forget the results, we lose sight of reality. The balanced opposition between these two men made the history of the Three Kingdoms profound, great, and immortal. Therefore, when future generations find themselves at a crossroads in life, they should remember Zhuge Liang, to keep a righteous heart amidst the swirling tide of fame and power. And if they must walk through the storms of power, they should not forget the lesson from Sima Yi, that endurance is not weakness, but sometimes the beginning of a great transformation. But in the end, they should ask themselves, do I want to be someone who conquers the world, or someone who wins the hearts of the people? Ladies and gentlemen, history is not merely a record of winners and losers, but a mirror reflecting the hearts of those who come after. Zhuge Liang, who dedicated his life to loyalty and died for righteousness despite his failures, still moved mountains and rivers, earning the admiration of all. Sima Yi, who endured for half a lifetime, step by step walked into the path of kingship, rising from the shadows to reach the highest peaks of power. Yet his authority still evokes both respect and caution from posterity. Two individuals, two aspirations, two outcomes, but both are exceptional talents born of the heavens, destined to face each other in a way that no one could replace. Without Sima Yi, future generations would have a hard time fully understanding the greatness of Zhuge Liang. And without Zhuge Liang, Sima Yi would not have had the opportunity to prove his unmatched abilities in the fierce backdrop of the Three Kingdoms period. So, in your opinion, if we were to place these two extraordinary figures on a scale, who would be more deserving of respect? Is it Zhuge Liang, the one who lost in battle but won the hearts of the people? Or is it Sima Yi, the one who achieved ultimate victory but carries the shadow of power? Please leave your comments below and share your thoughts. Every opinion is a valuable piece in the multifaceted picture of history. And if you found today's story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who love history, so we can continue preserving these glorious pages of the past. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We look forward to seeing you in future stories about the heroes of the past.